Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And today we are joined by Sam Twiselton, who is fresh back. Was it Mallorca, Sam?
Yeah.
Mallorca, fresh back from there, and I would imagine has probably achieved more in those brief times she's been back than I have in a very, very long time, because of how how busy and if you followed her over the last, for me, it's been 10 years of kind of, following her work and being kind of, I guess, amazed at a distance. You will have a sense of what she is, capable of in such a short time. So thanks ever so much for sparing the time. And I'm sure the listeners are super excited about learning more about how you got to where you are and all that stuff. So if we start with, I guess, now, we know that you're a professor, but what does your kind of working week look like at the moment?
So I'm now an emeritus professor, which when I started calling myself that, everybody started congratulating me like it was some kind of award.
Right.
And it really isn't. It basically means you're sort of retired from the university. So I have an attachment to Sheffield Hallam, which is where I've worked for the last 10 years, but more like an alumni type of attachment. So I am an emeritus. I do the occasional thing for them, but I'm not employed by them anymore. Which means I am semi-retired now, really. Although, as you say, seem to be just as busy as ever. So just before I left the university, which was a couple of years ago, I was the director of the Institute of Education there.
Right.
And that was a bit of the university that has things to do with schools, teacher development, ITT, research, school-related research, etc. And to be honest, since I left, I kind of carried on doing a lot of the same things, because although I did have an internal aspect to the role, increasingly in the latter years, vast majority of what I'd done, which is probably where you've sort of noticed, has been external, and I've just carried on doing a lot of that kind of stuff. So this week there's been a lot to do with Teach First, because I'm a trustee for them. Also Shine Education Charity that is there to support teachers working with the kind of most deprived children in the north. And just a really nice. The good thing about my life these days is I can absolutely pick and choose.
Yeah, of course.
So I just do the stuff I know I can make a contribution to, and I will find interesting. So I'm a very lucky person. Really.
Yeah,
living my best life.
Well, take us some steps backwards then from the professor stuff. Where so you did. I guess you did a. You did. Undergrad. You were a teacher. Or how does that work?
Yeah, so like lots of people who end up in education, my mum was a teacher.
Right.
She was a primary school teacher, and so I spent all my time at school and most of it at university saying, "There's no way I'm going to be a teacher." So I went to Oxford and did a degree in philosophy and theology, so that's nothing to do with teaching. And that was definitely me telling myself that it's too uncool to do what your mum does. Although, having said that, I did used to go and volunteer in her school right from being in sixth form and through the time I was at university. I helped with set up a netball team in her school, and I did enjoy it. And then coming towards the end of my degree, it just felt inevitable that I had to admit, actually, I thought being a teacher was cool.
Right.
I was a bit worried about not living up to my mum, because she was brilliant. I think that's the truth of it, really, why I didn't want to do it previously. So I ended up going to Charlotte Mason College. So I'm from the Lakes.
Right.
Lived all my kind of childhood up in Cumbria. So I went to Oxford, and then thought of my teacher training, I'd like to go back home, as many people do. So I went to what was then Charlotte Mason College. It's now part of the University of Cumbria, and I did a primary PGCE.
Right.
And then I went into primary teaching for a period of time, which I don't know if how much you want me to keep going.
No, I think we'd be fascinated. I mean, that's good enough start for us, and I'm sure we'll learn more as we go through. But to know that you were, primary school teacher, mum was a teacher, all that sort of stuff, and how you got to where you are today. Well, for those that are new to the podcast, we have a kind of set of, I guess, stock elements that Sam's chosen beforehand, which will then add to the structure of the session. And the first one is what we call a fast friends question. So these are questions that get increasingly vulnerable, with the goal of kind of building connection and empathy and kind of shared experience between people. And so the first one that Sam chose was, if you could wake up tomorrow having gained one quality or ability, what would it be? So tell us what that is, Sam.
So I don't know why it came so quickly, because it's a sort of question I think I would previously found hard to answer. But yeah, I think it's just been on my mind recently, and that is physical confidence.
Okay.
By which I mean to be the kind of person who feels confident enough about my own body and my own abilities to physically try stuff. Which, when I look back on my life, the things I regret are when I've not kind of agreed to do things that maybe the rest of my family have done, or appreciated sport in the way I know a lot of my friends do. I've recently, in recent years, got into running in a really, really hobbledy, kind of arthritic sort of way, and and that's made me realise, it is actually quite satisfying when you feel yourself getting
Yeah.
better at something. But yeah, I was one of those people. I don't think I was terrible at PE, but I was definitely one of those people who dreaded when you had to be picked,
Yeah.
that you might be last, and just felt really unsure of myself. And it would just be lovely to suddenly feel really, I feel lots of other things would flow
Of course.
from feeling confidence in my own sort of physical ability. That makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And I think there's something in there, isn't there, around, I mean, when I talk to people about confidence development, there's potentially a slowdown in confidence development when you reach adulthood, because you get more control over the things you do
Mm.
and don't do.
Exactly. Absolutely spot on.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to go and run a 10K. You
Yeah.
have a lot more choice, and
Yeah.
therefore you then start to stay within your bubble a bit more, don't you?
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely. Yeah. I've
yeah,
very
I
much done
mean,
that.
the only link that will make you laugh with physical, because I was a PE teacher and I've done,
Yeah. When you said PE voice, I thought,
yeah,
oh
PE
God.
voice. I've been very active for a long time, but I've always been active in an unhealthy way, if that makes sense. Like, people say, "Oh, you're so healthy," and I go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold on! Don't confuse activity with health." Because I had a literally, this is so topical, but two weeks ago I had a bad back, and I thought, "Oh, it's a bad back," and it got worse and worse, and I thought, "Oh," and someone said, "Oh, do you do any mobility?" And I was like, well, I don't even know what that means. I lift weights above my head and things like that. And they thought you should just go onto YouTube and just look for a mobility. So I did that, and I thought, come on, force yourself to do it. And so you watch this 30-minute video, and it makes you do these activities. Oh my god! Every single one of them hurt. I was like, lift this and leg in this position. I was thinking, God. I think I think my physical literacy or confidence has dipped a little bit there. Brilliant. All right. Well, let's keep moving on, because I'm sure you're busy. So we want to talk about this next thing called an ignition point. And again, for those that haven't tuned in before, these are events or people sometimes in people's lives that have had a demonstrable impact on them and transformed them in some way. And this first one you've called Ambleside Campus Closure. So tell us a bit about what happened and why it transformed you.
So I told you that I went to Charlotte Mason to do my PGCE.
Yeah.
Fast forward, oh God, probably 30 more years later, I was working at what then had become the University of Cumbria, and what was Charlotte Mason College had become the Ambleside campus of the University of Cumbria, and I was based there. I was the head of School of Early Years and Primary, so by now I was been working in university for quite a long time, and I was in a pretty senior role. In fact, I think I was the most senior person actually based at that campus at the point where the university, which was really newly formed, it was formed from lots of different constituent parts, Charlotte Mason being one of them, just at the time of the credit crunch. And very shortly after it became a university, went into a big sort of financial decline, which became a crisis. For which they got to a point where they weren't sure they could pay the staff salaries the sort of the following month, and so sort of knee jerk action had to be taken, which was to announce the closure of the Ambleside campus.
Oh,
And it was done in quite a dramatic way. I suppose it probably had to be. There were undergraduates and postgraduates studying there at the time. So the announcement was made in December. So some of these people, particularly the first years, hadn't been there that long. And this announcement was made, and obviously for staff as well as for students, it was really dramatic,
geez, yeah.
traumatic. And I found myself, as the most senior person there, having to sort of front quite a lot of the meetings and communications with staff and students.
Yeah.
And yeah, talk about kind of, I hadn't been in that role that long, and it
No.
like was the most senior role I'd ever been in. Talk about having to sort of grow up
Yeah.
overnight.
Jeez.
And yeah, looking back, it was sort of pivotal in many ways. I mean, I think it was sort of emotionally, it was one of those standout things. Looking back, I think I handled it certainly better than the vice chancellor of the university at the time. I was able to play on my emotional attachment to that place to I feel like demonstrate enough empathy with the people. People were crying. There were students.
I
They
can imagine.
they made a cardboard coffin
Oh, wow.
and put the University of Cumbria on the side and marched round Ambleside, this tiny little village in the Lake District that the campus was based in. With the sort of funeral music and things playing.
Wow.
It was, people were crying. These first year students in particular, what became really apparent really early on, after in the response to this news, was they'd chosen Ambleside, which, as I say, it's a tiny. I don't, some of you listeners will have been there. Beautiful, scenic, but small village in the lakes. They had chosen it because that's the kind of place they wanted to study,
Right.
and they were really, really. I mean, they weren't being chucked off the out of the university. That what was going to happen to them? They were going to be relocated to Lancaster,
Right.
Relatively small town just down the road. They were really scared at the thought of being
Yeah.
in what that seemed to them a big. They thought of it as a city, and it isn't. And so there was an awful lot of reassuring of the students, and obviously staff were worried for their jobs. I mean, nobody actually lost their job as a result of it, which was helpful.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
they didn't want to move either. So there was an awful lot of reassuring and communication, and being as transparent as possible. I mean, the truth was it had to happen. It
Yeah.
was the only way that they were going to save the money. So in some ways, that helped me feel like I was on solid ground in terms of the communication, even though I had to have a lot of empathy with the emotion and so on. I think looking back though, it also taught me a lot about the importance of finances and proper financial planning,
Yeah.
and why it really matters. As I became more senior again, sort of moving on from that job, and then when I came to Sheffield Hallam a few years later, I took the bottom line much, much more seriously than I think I had
Yeah.
previously, because although we might find it a bit boring and a bit scary to think about these things, actually it's a lot worse if the finances aren't
Yeah.
secure and suddenly you're worrying about your mortgage or where you're studying or whatever. So yeah, it was a very kind of pivotal moment for me.
Wow. Yeah. Ignorance is definitely not a strategy in those situations, is it? Um, One of the
Absolutely.
things that comes to mind, which I would love to pick your brains about, I suppose, is I would imagine that lots of leaders, myself included, kind of progress up through the levels without accruing some of the necessary skills, and experiences that we need when
Absolutely.
we get up to there.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess one of them, which I hear quite a lot, is that sort of high profile conflict management that you had to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're certainly in a situation now where there's a lot more kind of union activity and stuff like that, and I would imagine people are thrust into those positions where they haven't been before. But I think you
Yeah.
alluded to some of the techniques or strategies you used, but just tell us a bit more about, were there any principles that you kept in mind in that situation?
Oh, I mean, you're absolutely bang on in terms of what you've done previously, but I think this is probably particularly the case in education, where you get to a certain point through being really good at teaching and learning stuff,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you're in this management position where there's a whole load of stuff that's nothing to do with teaching and learning that you've
No.
got to get your head around. So I'm not sure if at that point I had anything other than instinctive principles. You know, I
Yes.
don't think I had
Yeah.
properly thought through sort of principles for action,
No.
which maybe as a result of that and some, you know, and other experiences I came to have more in a more a sort of thought through way later on. My gut was be as transparent as you can,
Yeah.
and you know, be as honest about the finances as you can. And that wasn't, you know, looking back, I may have gone too far with that in the way I talked to particularly those undergraduates who you know, they just needed to know really that they were going to be okay and their degree was going to continue, and possibly, yeah, whether I went too far in sort of spelling out the seriousness of the situation. But my gut instinct was to do that, and I did, and it felt okay. It felt like it worked.
Yeah.
That thing about empathy, which I've mentioned already, but it's just getting that fine line between sort of aligning yourself with the people who you're communicating with
Yeah.
and you know, definitely, you know, genuinely empathizing with them, while still recognizing that you're in a leadership position.
Yeah.
You've got this really bad message that you have to be able to defend. And in some ways, this was a straightforward. What I suppose I couldn't defend was why it had to be taken mid-year in the way it
Sure.
had. But the fact it had to be taken, you know, seemed clear to me. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm waffling a bit,
No, I
really.
think you've hit on the head there, really. And a lot of times, I mean, the two words that you said that are sort of ringing in my ears are transparency and empathy. You know, and like you said, I would imagine it's rare that somebody in those sorts of situations, especially in the moment, even have access to logical, rational thinking and strategies. You've got to go with your gut. And hopefully that gut is to listen and listen and listen and communicate
Yeah,
and communicate and communicate.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, wow, that is a
yeah. I think
tricky
that's
one.
right. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to your first launchpad. And so I'll just share the screen. But this one, I think, for me, it came about when I was doing lots of reading about psychological safety, really. But also, I think I've had a tendency in my career to be quite protective over my ideas, or to potentially wait until they were really fully formed, if not perfect, before I put myself out there and asked for feedback. And I don't think that's helped me a huge amount. And so this one's called Holding Things Lightly. And it came to me, this idea that, you know, as leaders, one of the things we should do is to not hold so tightly onto our opinions, our beliefs, and things like that. And so I started thinking about this idea that, you know, if you can lead with tentativeness, that might be one kind of key approach if you want to build psychological safety and open communication. And when I started delving into it a little bit, it kind of came out this idea that, yeah, you know, when you're telling someone about an idea, or you're presenting an idea, to hold that lightly, that it's just an idea, you know, and you are, you know, kind of explicitly putting it out there for it to be shot at, you know. And I then went further and sort of thought, well, you know, in terms of your level of control, hold that tightly. In terms of your failures, certainly, again, like most people, those failures resonated probably a bit too loudly in my head, unhelpfully loud. And actually, you know, I was lucky enough to have people to say, okay, right, move on. Yep, that happened. Move on. You know, hold it lightly. You know, hold it for as long as you need to, but don't kind of, you know, keep hold of it. Opinions, I guess, links to ideas. And then I started thinking about status as well. You know, I think that's quite difficult. You've held even loftier positions than me, but I think once you start believing the hype and, you know, that suddenly, because you've got a title, that gives you some sort of, you have to behave in a slightly different way or
Mm,
something like that. And you probably do, but to hold that lightly. And then again, not to get too hung up on your successes, and that,
mm,
again, they need to be moved on quickly. So yeah, so I was thinking about that, and kind of the advice I was giving myself really is to seek out the learning from all the situations, to kind of anticipate that that kind of cognitive discomfort is part of the process. It's almost like that wrangling inside that leads to something better is actually something you should
mm,
look for. And when it's happening, you should be thinking, "Oh, great, something good's coming off the back of this." I guess this is an obvious one, but difficult for leaders. This
mm,
idea that sometimes you get the misunderstanding that you've got to do everything yourself and that you shouldn't bother other people and work in isolation. And I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth, could it? This idea of valuing diversity of perspective, and even seeking it out, building teams where
mm,
not just the demographics are different, but the expertise and the opinions are different, but kind of complementary, so that you can get the full picture. Start kicking around. I mean, again, I feel like I'm admitting myself as a terrible leader here, but no one particularly great at delegation either, because of my kind of obsession with doing everything myself. But
mm,
yeah, building
mm,
people up, giving people responsibility, making yourself kind of progressively unnecessary, I suppose is the phrase.
mm,
Um, and then, like you said, this kind of open communication, kind of building safe spaces where people feel like they can challenge you, and then they can contribute and question. So yeah, I've been holding on to that for a while now, about how I should
mm.
maybe release some of the control. But why did this one resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think from mistakes more than from successes, to be honest. Certainly, it kind of leapt out as me as something, I could immediately align it to a situation I found myself in, and maybe I'm being unfair, maybe more latterly to successes as well, where I kind of learned from what went wrong with that situation.
Right.
And I think possibly I'm in some ways different from you in that I think certainly in the past I have come up with what I feel like is a vision and a way forward, and been so enthusiastic about it, and feel like I've been really openly communicated with the team around me, and feel like they've been brought in and we're all agreed. And at the time I would have thought I probably listened to their input and amended to some extent, my thinking to show that. And yet, sort of 6 months later, I've looked behind and they're all not with me. They're making all the right noises.
Yeah.
There was no sense at all.
No.
I could give you a few examples of it where it felt like we were all agreeing about things,
Yeah.
and then 6 months later, nothing's really happened in terms of
Wow.
the bits that they were meant to do. I mean, that's not, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but
I know what you mean.
they're not quite as with you as you thought
Yeah.
they were. And looking back, trying to work out what that, definitely in terms of the things that you put up on the slide, they mustn't have felt as able to challenge.
Maybe.
But also maybe I just hadn't articulated what I meant by that vision
Yeah.
as clearly as I thought I had.
Yeah.
So maybe they thought they were with me and they were doing what they needed to, but actually the things that I expected to happen. So there's
That's
something about
fascinating.
planning and being really clear in terms of actions and implementation here maybe as well. But yeah, yeah, you know,
That's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
And like you said, I mean, that makes me think. And one of the other launch pads somewhere in the book talks about kind of looking in the mirror, and I think you demonstrated that really well there, where, you know, your first instinct was, what did I, they're not with me. What did I
yeah,
not do?
yeah,
Where's my role in that? And I think that's
yeah.
a useful kind of message for people, to take. Um, yeah, that's so funny.
Mm,
Jeez. Again, I've been in lots of those meetings. I think I remember being in meetings where the senior leader has put forward an idea, asked for opinion, people have nodded and says yes. They've left the room for whatever reason, and instantly people go, "Well, that'll never work, will it? What a
yeah,
terrible
yeah,
idea!" And I
yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah.
"Hang on, but
Yeah, why didn't you say it?
you just
Yeah,
nodded."
yeah, yeah,
And of course, until I didn't even know that word psychologically safety even existed at that point. But I guess that's what they were talking about, that people didn't feel safe to say, I'm not sure that's going to work.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, let's move on to your next kind of, fast friends question. And I won't lie, I'm nervous about this one because I don't know if I mentioned it before. I'm a bit of a crier. So, Sam's chosen. What is your most terrible memory? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think you've already had a conversation
Have
on
I? Yeah,
with
with
somebody
um,
on yeah. So it is my mum dying.
oh,
Um, she died back in 2017, and yet it still feels like it was yesterday in some ways. Um, and it was hot. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but
yeah,
it was a long death in the sense that she died of sepsis.
right.
So she went in for a very routine operation. She's 82, so a decent age,
Yeah,
but relatively physically healthy. Went in for this what should have been a 1 day only routine operation, and something went wrong, and she got sepsis, and she spent a month
right.
battling sepsis before eventually, it took her, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it was an absolutely awful month.
Oh,
But then, just my life is just not the same without her.
empty. Yeah.
It's like a piece of you has gone. My dad also had died, a few years before that, and that was awful. But not in the that sounds an awful thing to say, but it's just something sort of so deep about the
Yeah.
bond, that it's kind of parent mother bond, or at least there was for me. And I think about her all the time. I miss her all the time. Life's
Yeah.
just not the same without her.
No, it's so sad, isn't it? And I, I guess it was difficult to have good memories in that last part, was it as well?
I mean, there were so, yeah. I mean, because this thing took, as I say, a month, and she was, incredible matriarch, grandchildren, children, sort of cousins, and so on, all just loved her so deeply.
Yeah,
During that month, there was a lot of bonding,
of course.
and when she finally died, I think there were about 15 of us in the room with her. It was one of those switching off the machines kind of thing, and
Oh,
we all wait. Took a while, and the absolute palpable love in that room.
right.
It reminded me of the love that you have just after you've given birth. It was the same kind of,
Was it?
you just felt like you could touch it, sort of
Yeah.
thing. So that, yeah, I mean that, and that's exactly what she would have wanted. And I'd like to think that she was not conscious, but I'd like to think that she still felt it. So there were definitely positive aspects
Yeah,
came out of
yeah.
it.
And like you say,
But
you hope that. I mean, that must be. You know, hopefully, we're thinking much further in the head in the future
yeah,
when we're going to go. But it must be a nice feeling if you've got the presence to know that you are surrounded by you know
yeah,
people in that last moment.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, made me think that's how I would want to go, and I'd
Yeah.
want to, and she was conscious for some of that month leading up to that point, and there were plenty of opportunities for her to consciously see the love
Oh,
around
nice.
her, and that was, it was awful in the way that it was dragged out in a way, but in another way, nothing was left unsaid. And
Yeah.
I've heard people who had have lost loved ones to cancer and so on say the same. The good thing about it is that
Yeah.
it's coming, is you do
I
get
guess.
to sort
Yeah.
of say those things.
And the message for all of us, and this is a similar conversation I was having with Alex, is to not wait for those
Yeah,
situations to happen in order to make those connections with loved ones.
yeah,
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 tricky bit, isn't
absolutely.
it? Okay, well, let's talk about your next kind of ignition point. So another thing that kind of transformed you in such a, and this was the ITT market review, and you might need to acronym bingo for anyone overseas that's listening. Tell us a bit about what ITT stands for.
Yeah, okay, so that's initial teacher training. So that's what a lot of the world will call pre-service teacher training. So how you initially train to be a teacher before you get your qualified status. And the market review, which is a confusing term, is the name that was given by the English government to a fairly major reform they wanted to make to how initial teacher training is done in the English system. I had been involved in quite a lot of things leading up to this with the government that had, to some extent, sort of prepared me for this, but actually it turned out to be a much more dramatic and much more controversial sort of set of reforms than they had been. So I was on the advisory group. I was the only person from the university sector who was on this advisory group. It started during the depth of lockdown, and mostly sort of through various variants of the lockdowns that we endured in that time. And how much detail to go into, really. There were the reasons why I agreed to join the advisory group, and to be fair, the officials who sort of contacted me about it were pretty upfront from the beginning that it could be quite big, and it could be certainly it could be controversial. But the reason why I agreed to join it is there were definitely things around how we train teachers that need to be improved.
Right.
And it felt like this could be an opportunity to really grasp them. And also, I knew I'm a principled but pragmatic person who can sort of help to stop mad things happening, as well as hopefully encourage good things to happen. So this was a group that met. I think it was over a period of 2 years in total. The original sort of vision was really dramatic in terms of what they wanted to achieve, which was basically there to be a very small number of very large initial teacher training providers in the system. So that would really have thrown what we currently have completely up in the air and created something sort of brand new. Over what was actually a really good period of meetings, quite intense meetings, we moved away from starting with that vision to take a much more bottom-up approach to what needs to change in the system, and sort of did it from a trainee point of view. So we kind of went on the trainee journey right through from initially thinking, oh, maybe I could be a teacher, to ending up as a qualified teacher. What is it that you need every step of the way? And that got us to a much more sensible place. The pivotal bit about it, though, was having got to what felt like a more sensible place. Suddenly, the need to go into a public consultation was upon us much quicker than I thought it was going to be.
Right.
And the chair of the advisory group had to write a draft document, which would be the document that would go out for consultation, in a really short period of time. We had, as an advisory group, a weekend to look at this and comment on it, with a view that it would be going public, within a couple of weeks after that sort of thing.
Yeah, wow.
And when it was written, it was just full of stuff that I could not put my name to. And it was written as if it was in the first person plural, so as if all the group had written it. And it was just full of things that not only could I not agree to, but I knew would be mad if we did them. So it didn't feel to me like it had reflected most of the sort of meetings that we'd been in, and where I thought we were going in terms of more sensible ways of dealing with reform. It was just full of things that would. It was a bit. It wasn't quite as dramatic as there'll only be X number of teacher training providers, but it was a bit along those lines. And I actually had quite an emotional response when I first read this thing on a Saturday morning when I was meant to be on a family visit down in London. Anyway, over the weekend, I was in touch a lot with the senior official at the government end about my views on this, and she was great. They are neutral, these civil servants, but she could understand where I was coming from in my concerns, and also I think had some very practical concerns that she shared with me about whether the feasibility of whether it would all work. To cut a long story short, sort of between us, we negotiated, me using my sort of maximum leverage point. My initial point was, my initial sort of response was, I'm just going to walk away from this.
Right.
So my name comes off that document. They go out to consult on it, but my name is off. I won't do it in a massively flouncy way, but I will, if people ask me,
Yeah.
explain to them why. Because it was public. I was on this group. Instead of that, what we agreed was I would use the leverage I had to get some fairly substantial changes made.
Right.
And the things there were still quite a lot in things in there that I was still not happy with. I was sort of given permission to talk to Skills Week and TES about my worries. So my name went on the document, and I continued to be involved. I actually went, supported the DFE with consultation meetings, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But I was able to point to a couple of articles that were in TES and Skills Week, which outlined my concerns, which I could then keep pointing to. So I felt like I was holding a principal position while
Right.
still staying in the tent. And
Yeah.
lots of people to this day absolutely blame me and feel I did the wrong thing in not walking away at that
Right.
point. But I feel confident and secure that I did the right thing because the outcome that we eventually achieved
Yeah.
was mainly okay.
Yeah.
Some really good things about it. One
And,
awful thing about it, which was how re-accreditation happened.
well, and imagine what would have happened if you did walk away.
Well, this is it. This is what
Mm.
I will. They wouldn't have gone and found somebody else.
No.
They would have carried on. Well, if they had found somebody else, they'd have found somebody who agreed with the,
Exactly. Yeah.
the things they didn't like. But actually, they would have just carried on, and they would have published it in its original form, and
Yeah.
the changes would have been a lot worse than they ended up being. So
Wow. I mean, there's some lessons there, I think, for maybe leaders further down or earlier in their career, where they are in those situations where they are, presented with something that they have very strong views against, and then put in that situation of, do I stay quiet, let this happen,
mm,
and then afterwards say I didn't agree with it?
mm,
Or do I find something in me to, yeah. And I guess you had a nice thing, and we're quite lucky in education, I think, sometimes, in that with the students
yeah,
can be our, if we just stay
yeah,
focused on that
yeah,
principle,
absolutely,
that
yeah,
principle
yeah,
makes all of the decisions a little bit
yeah.
easier,
It does.
doesn't
It
it?
does. Yeah,
I guess you had the trainee teachers in mind, did you, with that?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and ultimately those
The,
students
yeah,
that their trainee teachers were going to be
far end.
teaching.
Yeah. Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
did you, did that? How did that affect? Did that transform you in any way? Did you behave differently after that? I mean,
Um, I think it kind of cemented me more strongly than ever the need to get this balance right between what are your non-negotiable principles for action, and what I've got this deeply pragmatic side to me. So I can think of many other people in the sector who probably wouldn't have agreed to be on the group in the first place, or if
right.
they had, definitely would have walked away. The pragmatist in me knew exactly what you said. This is going to happen whether you're in it or not.
Yeah.
So practically, what can you do to 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 get the best outcome in your view that you can from this? So I feel like it was a tightrope, and I sometimes get criticised by people, and I think, oh God, are they right? But mostly, I don't think they are. Mostly, I think I got that right, and I think there is. You were saying about earlier on, about the people who you feel have agreed in a meeting, and then as soon as the leader has gone, they'll say, well, that won't work. Um, I've always been somebody who will speak up. I think it's really important. If you've
Yeah.
got concerns, you should say it, and then it's out in the open. It's on the table. You can talk about it, and either you be persuaded or you won't. But at least I just don't think you're in a position to complain about things
No.
if you haven't used the opportunity that you were presented with to do something about it. So I think probably had all of those principles to start with, but I think it has kind of cemented in me more clearly, and I'm probably at this stage in my career, it's probably more about how I support others now.
Yeah.
In mentoring and coaching other people, I feel like the advice of how you walk that line
Yeah.
is quite, I mean, obviously my example is sort of a fairly dramatic one, but everybody will
Of course.
encounter those kinds of situations.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Um,
Well, this links kind of nicely into your next, your next launch pad, and this one's about kind of decision making. And it's funny, I tend to, because the doctorate people expect me to be able to describe leadership in like 5 words. They say, "Oh, Chris, so come on, what is leadership?" Or I'm like, "Oh God," and I have to explain that you know, the more I read about leadership, the more bloody confused I got about
yeah.
leadership. But I think when I was a middle leader, I thought I had it all cracked, and then you start opening the bonnet
Yeah,
a bit more and looking around and thinking, "Oh Christ, all those
yeah,
things have to happen." And then you start reading it, and I remember vividly on the doctorate thinking I was going to read a book where someone would say, "Right, we've agreed," and it was completely opposite. It was like still completely contested. However, I think one thing that I've sort of, I guess, made peace with in my head is the importance of decision making. If you were going to look to what do leaders do that other people don't necessarily have to do, is probably make decisions. Ultimately, they're probably at the very end, aren't they, of a process where they're making the decision. This is a bit long winded if you're looking at this on the screen, but I wrote down, when I was doing this, that decision making is probably the single greatest responsibility of a leader. And because of that, it carries a huge impact both on the project itself and the people involved. And a kind of that complexity makes it difficult for CPD, but also a really worthy focus. And I know a lot of the MPQs now, and I run the kind of MPQSL for our kind of teaching school hub, and decision making is a whole day on it, and you uncover things which we won't talk about now. But I mean, the ladder of inference, I never even knew that existed. And so when I was looking at this, I thought, okay, let's break it down into why this is so important, and then why it's so difficult. And I started with the impact, and I started thinking about, okay, well, if the leader makes a good or a bad decision on the project, that can mean something's implemented well or not implemented well, naturally. It can mean, obviously, then that the project has the intended impact or not. Really key is the sustainability. Decisions made early on can have a massive impact on the sustainability of a project. But the other thing that I think leans even more in is the impact that bad decisions have on people. And so I started talking about trust. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, that every bad decision a leader make dents the trust that people have in them, and every good decision adds to it. And there's this kind of back and forth, kind of a marbles in the jar, emotional bank account sort of thing. That naturally then leads into levels of engagement. And again, I was talking to someone the other day about as adults, we are experts at almost faking engagement, aren't we? We can give a
absolutely.
really, really superficial level of engagement, which means we don't get sacked, but means that we don't actually, added much value. And then ultimately, well-being. I mean, frightening to think of the impact that some decisions that leaders make have on the well-being of the people that are involved. And I think in most cases, it's never an intended outcome. It's one of those things that's a kind of an unintended consequence that if they could begin with the end in mind and have that as a focus, it probably would make different challenges. Then I started thinking about the challenges, I suppose, of decision making. And a lot of times we are faced with novel problems, which means we don't have the expertise, which is a tricky one. Sometimes there isn't a clear way forward. So that level of ambiguity within a challenge or a project causes issues. Naturally, because we work with people, and sometimes I quite work like working on my computer because it does exactly what I want it to do. Or usually anyway, apart from unmuting and stuff like that. But yeah, when we're working with people and students, and if you're working in large schools and trusts and stuff, the level of moving parts is frightening, and so that's complex. Time seems to ruin everything, doesn't it? I was doing a training session with someone the other day on taking a coaching approach to conversation, and we were discussing how they were reflecting on how differently they deal with people who stop them in the corridor for help and those that
mm,
book a meeting for help.
mm,
And there's suddenly
mm,
so much
mm.
unintendedly more directive in the corridor,
Yeah,
less time
yeah,
to ask questions, less inquisitive, and so time's a tricky one. And then
mm,
we can't avoid the fact that we've accrued over time certain beliefs and
mm,
biases and just human traits that might get in the way. Um, and so yeah, that was what I was thinking when I was kind of thinking about decision making. But
mm.
why did this one resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, loads of different reasons, really, all of which I can resonate with the things that you've just been saying. I suppose the thing that really leapt out at me originally probably links more to the ambiguity one, and this is more from being a middle leader. There was a period of time where I was a middle leader where the sort of level above me uh, were so paralysed by the complexity of the decisions they had to make that they didn't do anything.
Right.
And as a middle leader, sort of underneath, and sort of recognising the sort of the impact that had on people just not being able to move forward, um, was really kind of real. And I actually went to an away day. It's actually when I got a temporary appointment where I was elevated up to their level. And one of the early things that happened in that new role was we had a consultant do a sort of big away day discussion with us where we were looking at the decisions that we had to take. And these two really brilliant colleagues, and I want to be critical of them, who had been for months been putting off lots of big decisions,
Right.
all had really, really good reasons why they felt they couldn't make them.
Right.
And this consultant guy, I think he was, more from sort of private sector, just came in and sort of cut through it and said, sometimes you have to pretend that things are simple when they're
Right.
not.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't find a way forward.
Yeah.
And so it was a really helpful, pivotal moment for them, I think, in that some decisions were then made. So you could say, well, that led me then into a situation. Maybe it does feed into that one that I was talking about that came a bit later, where I thought everybody had understood me and
Yeah.
were with me. Maybe I moved to decisions too quickly, as a result, maybe of hating the opposite.
Yeah.
When you're paralysed and everybody's just going, for God's sake, just make a decision. So everything that you said, the complexity. It is the most important thing that you do as a leader, and particularly those that occasionally the ones that you are the book stops with you, and you are basically making it on your own, even though you will have listened to lots of people in order to make it. Um, it's probably the most stressful thing that you do.
Yeah.
But I think it does do you good to remember that often the absence of a decision is worse than a
Yeah.
decision, even if it's the wrong one. Having said that, I can think of many examples of where stupid decisions have been made just simply because the right people weren't asked. I think one that really irritated me much earlier on in my career is when we're doing this big sort of project with schools. This is in the university, and I was really excited about it. I was leading on it, and the consultation meeting where we're bringing all these school leaders in to tell them about it and get them engaged in it. The date was changed to SATS week,
Oh God.
and it was one of those things. I remember at the time saying to the person who'd made this decision, if you just don't ask the right person, right people,
Yeah.
because obviously nobody came in, all had to be redone. That's probably me, my sort of younger, naive days of thinking, well, just make sure that you always ask the right people and you always make the right
Yeah.
decisions. And of course, it's always more complicated than that. But there is something about having the right sort of sources of information
Yeah.
informing your decision, and sometimes they are the really practical ones, not just the sort of deeper, bigger picture ones, maybe.
Yeah,
Um,
that's really fascinating. And
mm,
I was thinking as you were talking then about there probably is a sweet spot, isn't there, in terms of time to make a decision, It's like
yeah,
not too quick, not too slow,
yeah,
Yeah, I guess this is as complicated any of those sweet spots, and it's different in different situations.
Yeah.
But that's an
I think
interesting.
it is, looking back over sort of successful decision making processes I've been involved in, either my own or being involved with other people. You tend to make much better ones when you carve out the time and space to do it well.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you take forever.
No.
I think that that away day example is a good example. Really, just having quality time
Yeah.
to take a deep breath and really think about not just the sources of information that you have available to you, but the consequences and unintended consequences of the various ways that you might make
Yeah.
decide what
That's
will go from
interesting, isn't
that.
it? I'm just in my mind now thinking visually, as I tend to do, that probably the collection of additional perspectives pushes you towards the sweet spot. Because,
Mm, yeah,
isolation, yeah, if you're thinking about it on your
yeah,
own, you might want to make it quick. And
yeah,
if you don't involve other people, it might take long. That's interesting. Well, that's
yeah, yeah.
okay. Well, let's move on to your last Fast Friends question. And wow, this is intriguing by itself. I wasn't anticipating this one, which is great. And I'm sure people will be really interested. It says, "What embarrassing moment in your life comes quickest to mind?" Oh,
Well,
God.
it sounds like mine's actually going to be a lot more boring than Mary Myatt's from the same one.
Yeah.
It's actually when I was 5.
Right. Fine. Yeah.
Yes. And it was a fancy dress competition in the local village hall. And I think we had to dress up. Certainly, I was dressed up as an animal, and I was dressed up as a tortoise.
A tortoise. Right.
Yes, and my mum, being a primary school teacher, was absolutely determined that she was not going to make my costume for me. She could help me a bit, but it had to be my costume. So I made this tortoise thing out of a cardboard box
Right.
that then painted, and then it had places for my hands and my feet to stick out when I had green socks on them to
Yeah.
make me look like a tortoise, and then a head sort of space that I could pull the head back in. Well, when it came to this, we were basically asked to sort of parade around the village hall. And I was just so embarrassed because I was only 5. This costume was really awful compared to these really elaborate ones that everybody
Okay.
else's parents had made for them. I just kept my head in my in the box, and then we were parading around, and I couldn't just understand why there was so much laughter.
Right.
And they announced the winner, and it wasn't me. But I felt something go on the top of the box. I thought, what's this? Anyway, eventually they coaxed me out of my box, and they give me a consolation prize.
Okay.
It was some kind of bar of chocolate, because basically I'd been going the wrong way.
No way.
Because I'm amazed I didn't bang into everybody. To be honest, I probably did.
Oh, that is
Looking back, it sounds really cute, and I suppose it was. But oh God, I just could not come out of my
Can
box. I
you
was just
imagine?
so embarrassed. So
But you got to
embarrassed.
stay in the box, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it took them quite a long time to get me to
Well,
actually.
what a lovely way to
Right.
finish. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, the themes from today for leaders that are listening to this is that sort of importance of principles, I suppose, having a really fixed, like you said, a really clear sense of what your principles are, what your non-negotiables are, something about feeling confident enough and brave enough to, challenge things when you don't feel aligned or confident about them. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating stuff. So, how can people, connect with you online or get involved and work with you?
Oh, I love it when people do reach out. My go-to would have been Twitter. I am still on there, X or whatever we call it now.
Yeah,
But, like most people, I don't look at it much because it's just such a weird
it is getting
jumble of
weirder, isn't
things.
it?
But I would pick up a DM on there. LinkedIn has become a bit more my
Yeah, it's
go-to
becoming the
these
place to be.
days.
Yeah,
Yeah, so very happy for people to reach out to
great.
me
Yeah,
on there.
and you've got a website.
I do, but I don't use it, to be
No,
honest.
but people can contact you on there, and it's got a few
They
things that
can,
you
yeah.
do
If you
and
just Google me, you'll find
consultations
me
and
on
stuff like
there.
that.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute joy, as I said, pinch myself moment to be able to talk to you in person after I guess, using all your stuff for so long and seeing your name and all those things. So I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to connect with anything on Leadership Launchpads, obviously go to the website or just connect with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.
And thanks